Thanks, Minister, for being here today, and to all of your officials who are present and who will be taking questions after your appearance. While the radical extremist environment minister quoted an anti-energy activist group called Environmental Defence in the House of Commons about emissions reductions in Canada, I'm just going to focus on your government's actual federal national inventory report on emissions and ask you some questions about whether or not the carbon tax is actually worth the cost, since it is not reducing Canada's emissions to date. The fact is, of course, Canada has missed every single one of your government's emissions reductions targets, despite your increase of the carbon tax every year since you've implemented it. And Canadians know that emissions have increased each one of those years, except for during 2020, when governments locked Canadians down and the economy was severely damaged by those restrictions. In 2021, you said 2019 would be the last year of emissions increases in Canada, but just last week, your federal government's national inventory reported that Canada's emissions in 2022 were up from 698 million tonnes in 2021 and 686 million tonnes in 2020. During 2022, they were at 708 million tonnes. So will you just simply admit that your carbon tax is not worth the cost and it's failed to reduce Canada's emissions?
Thank you for the question. I would say a few things to that. I mean, the first is I know that folks on the Conservative side of the House often talk about missing targets, but the only target this government has ever had was the 30% below 2005 levels that we inherited from Prime Minister Harper. That's a 2030 target. We actually have made it more ambitious, so it's 40 to 45%, and there's a milestone that we actually implemented in the Act that went through Parliament that is a 2026 number, and we are fully on track to meet that. So we are on track to meet the targets that we actually have established. In terms of the National Inventory Report, what it shows is Canada actually has reduced emissions by 8% versus the 2005 level. It is on track to achieve the targets for 2030, so we are making good progress on the way there. And it also shows that actually 24 of those megatons in 2030, 79 or 78 of the megatons actually come from the carbon price. So it's almost a third of the reductions come from the carbon price.
Minister, you can forgive Canadians for not being compelled by your comparison to a number in 2005. You've been in government for 9 years, so let's just talk about what your claims have been, what your policies are, and what the outcomes have been. What your policy has been was to spike the carbon tax by 25% on April 1st, despite 8 premiers asking you not to, and despite more Canadians unable to feed themselves, house themselves, heat and cool themselves when they're needed. Your response has been your Liberal senators holding up Conservative Bill C-234 that would provide carbon tax exemptions on farmers and farm fuels at exactly a time when Canadian farmers are struggling to be able to produce food order, and Canadians can't afford to eat.
Ms. Stubbs, can I just pause that thought right there? We have a point of order from Mr. Bruson. Mr. Bruson on the point of order.
I appreciate everything that the member opposite, Ms. Stubbs, is raising, except for we're speaking with the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. It's about natural resources, and she's definitely focusing more on what if the Minister of Environment might be there for.
Point of order.
Wondering if she would be switching to talking about energy and natural resources in the main estimates.
Point of order.
We have another point of order, Mr. Bruson. Colleagues, on your point of order, Mr. Patzer on the point of order.
Well, yeah. I mean, all that this committee has talked about for the last number of years is anything that has to do with the environment, not actually to do with developing natural resources. And given the hyper-partisan speech that was given by the minister to kick things off here, my colleague is definitely well within her rights to say what it is that she is saying as a member.
Okay, so I have several points of order, and I have Mr. Angus on a point of order, so I'll go to you next. But I had asked colleagues not to use the point of orders for debate, and you can use your intervention for debate. But I will go to you, Mr. Angus, on a point of order.
Yes, on the same point of order, I think that opposition members need to be able to ask a question to the minister. They shouldn't have government members running interference and trying to break up the flow of the questions. If the questions are fair, if they're not abusive, it's the right of the MP to ask what questions they want of a minister.
Thank you. I think I've exhausted the point of order. So, colleagues, I would say, as to the original point of order, please ask your questions to the minister and try to keep it relevant to the conversation today on the main estimates and the questions the minister can ask that are related to his portfolio. And so thank you for your point of order, Mr. Bruson, and other colleagues who have provided a point of order as well. I'm going to go back to you, Ms. Stubbs, and we did stop your time. We will begin from where we had paused. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. And certainly, when the government uses revenue from Canadians from the carbon tax in the budget, and Canadians can't actually see the direct line between the cash grab that the government takes through the carbon tax to innovation or technology or new sources of energy. And in fact, the outcome of this government is anti-resource development, anti-energy, and holding Canada back from being able to provide the products and the technologies for our own self-sufficiency and for our allies around the world. Questions about the carbon tax, its revenue, and whether or not it's worth the cost are certainly relevant. So thanks, Chair, and thank you for the interventions from the other opposition. So, Minister, the reality is that the carbon tax is at $80 a ton right now. Your plan is to hike it to $170 a ton by 2030, in less than 6 years. I think it's really important for Canadians to know that that's your plan, given the affordability crisis that Canadians face right now due to your inflationary spending that has also hiked interest rates, and to all of the taxes and added costs that you are putting on resource developers, on farmers, and on all kinds of industrial development, which dampens the economy and also increases the price of goods of every single thing for every Canadian, just as the carbon tax was designed to do. So your plan is to double the carbon tax in less than 6 years. Will that stop the forest and wildfires that you mentioned at the beginning of your remarks?
Let me start with the
How high
comment
does
you
it
said
have
at
to
the
go?
beginning, which is why use 2005? 2005 is the base year that the Paris Agreement uses, so every country around the world uses it, but we have seen significant reductions since 2015 as well. In terms of the carbon price, and we've had this discussion in the House of Commons many times, but 8 out of 10 families actually get more money back. It works directly inverse to income, so actually people who live on the most modest incomes get the most money back. That is something that more than 300 economists have weighed in on, including Trevor Toombs from the University of Calgary, including Brent Dolter from the University of Regina. It is an affordability mechanism, but it is also effective in addressing the climate crisis. It, in 2030, will be about half of the emissions reduction, so will it address the impacts of climate change? Yes, over time it will. Just as deploying electric vehicles, deploying carbon capture and sequestration, improving energy efficiency, all will have an impact on reducing the impacts of climate change.